Hello. For those of you who don't know, I'm Viral Melon. I've played Duel TNT since the first day of its release back in June 2017, and have been actively competing since around the same time in 2018. I have the most first, second, and third place tournament finishes of any player ever, and am the head tournament admin for the game. I've also been a playtester for the majority of the game's updates and have recently begun contributing to them directly. Needless to say, I put a lot into this game for a very long time, and starting today, for the first time ever, I will be taking a hiatus from competitive play as a result of the current state of the game. This video is being made to explain why I'm doing this to the community, and to urge both the community and Tristan, the game's creator, to help me in solving a serious problem currently present in the game. In a word, the problem is air camping. More specifically, it's the playstyle wherein a player tries to maximize the amount of time they spend in the air by TNT jumping almost any time they're on the ground. It's exactly what you're seeing in this background footage right now, a set I had with Josh in a tournament about a month ago, which I lost. Josh is not the sole perpetrator of this strategy. I firmly believe it to be the most effective strategy right now, which is why I take issue with it, and it's one a large percentage of high-level players are now using. I can't blame them for this. In a competitive setting, it would be stupid to hold disrespect towards those who use strategies that make them win, but if never being on the ground is the win condition, I don't want to compete in this game. This may seem like a recent development, and that we should thus give more time to let counterplay emerge, but this is a tactic that has existed for years at this point. In Season 7, Trapper and Echo were by far the two best classes because of their ability to stay in the air and mix up their air mobility, which top players, including myself, abused to great success. In Season 8, everyone initially thought Shard was weak, until Sheriff made everyone look lost by abusing its quick 3 TNT jump to stay in the air constantly until the entire map was destroyed. Air camping has become more prevalent as a result of the major power spike most characters received in Season 9, but players are also simply discovering its effectiveness to a greater degree. Relatively untouched characters like Soldier and Gardener, for example, have recently seen more air campy strategies be successful. Even so, ever since Trapper and Echo, and especially ever since Shard, players including myself have been trying to find reliable counterplay to the strategy, and after years of trying, I'm resigning that it is simply stronger than staying on the ground in nearly every way. This is easy to see if you examine a situation in which one player is airborne and the other grounded. For the grounded player, the only two ways to pressure the airborne player are to use an anti-air or to read their landing and punish that with an attack. Most moves that theoretically work as anti-airs, like Phantom Jump or Portal, are close range and thus unreliable as anti-air options. In other words, air-to-airs. In most situations, things like Ghost Creepers or Magic Stars are the only anti-airs with enough range to apply reliable pressure, and rarely number more than 2 moves per class. These anti-airs also have to be used extremely well, as the grounded player needs to account for gravity, how long it takes the projectile to reach the opponent, and the potential for aerial drift. This is all without considering the aerial movement mix-ups that most classes have access to, many without needing a committal resource like Shard Shift or Trapper's Short Blast. Even if you do manage to land the anti-air, the airborne player being so far from the void gives them time to drift onto the ground, or at least gives them more time to use a recovery option before they would otherwise die. As far as punishing their landing goes, this is a viable option, but requires a correct read as long as there is enough pieces of ground left for the aerial player to potentially mix up where they land, along with requiring precise timing. Too early, and unless the ground breaks entirely, the landing player is unaffected. Too late, and they're able to leave the ground again before the attack lands, or tack off its explosion and use it as a jump. Covering a landing also requires you to aim at the landing position rather than the airborne player, forcing you to take your eyes off them and potentially letting them get away with unseen pressure from the air. Unless you're in an endgame situation where the airborne player is forced to land on ground that can be destroyed in one shot, this is all just to land an attack between jumps that is barely more effective than any attack from the airborne player performed at any time. For the airborne player, though, things are much easier. Not only can moves that trigger on block collision like bows be used on the grounded player despite airborne players being safe from them, but any move that works as an anti-air is still effective against the grounded player. In addition to this, the grounded opponent is on a static target, being much easier to hit. Grounded players can change their launch angle from explosions easier than airborne ones with jumps and grounded movement, and have access to crouch cancels as a defensive option, but this does little to close the gap, and by and large, if successfully hit off, they are much closer to the void and don't have the same opportunity to drift back onto the ground that the airborne player does. This is on top of the airborne player being able to see and shoot at the entire map fairly easily, while the grounded player cannot. Being airborne also gives an inherent ambiguity to positioning, as the airborne player can choose to land on any nearby ground. As I said, the grounded player needs to make a read and punish the aerial player's landing, but no such read is necessary for the aerial player to attack the grounded player with similar vulnerability. To put it simply, an airborne player is harder to pressure, commits less to their position, has better coverage and information, and has more opportunities to save themselves once hit, while still being able to access their full arsenal to attack the grounded player. Without a sufficient drawback or cost, it is an inherently advantageous position. The one reliable piece of counterplay I've discovered, other than air camping back, is for the grounded player to stall and destroy the map. Attacking the airborne player is fruitless early on, letting the grounded player hoard all their moves for survival purposes until endgame. Once the map is damaged to the point that any platform the airborne player chooses to land on can be reasonably predicted and destroyed with a single attack, air camping stops being effective. On top of being incredibly boring and uninteresting, this counterplay only works partially, because if the aerial player simply decides to stop air camping once it becomes unsafe to do so, they're able to play out endgame without suffering any disadvantage for the tactics they employed for the entire rest of the game. After all, air camping doesn't drain lives or consumables, so unless one of the players makes a mistake, both will end up with all their items and all their lives. Executing counterplay thus essentially turns every part of the game until endgame into a test of execution and patience. Neither player has a reason to deviate from this dynamic of air camping plus passivity either, because as established, neither is at a disadvantage once endgame begins. Given that air movement is something every class can access as a fundamental part of the game, I can imagine some people questioning why I take issue with this. For example, the current number 1 player, Spectangle, has stated that they prefer constant movement as a default game state, and that it should be what the game is built around. Ultimately, whether a meta of constant movement is a good one is up to Tristan, not me, but based on the design philosophy the game has had up to this point, I feel confident that this is not what he wants for the game. Perhaps the most unique and interesting part of Duel TNT is its stage. The many strengths and vulnerabilities of a given position, the need to adapt and find ground on the fly as the map is destroyed, the ways it can be manipulated, etc. A version of Duel TNT where air game is the only game is one that denies the intricacies of the maps the ability to shine. To be clear, I don't think the airborne aspect of Duel TNT should be removed entirely, merely curtailed, to provide balance between the two states. I want being in the air to be a calculated risk, not a default until punished tactic. I encourage other communities to raise their thoughts on this issue as well. If you do, too, believe this to be a problem, speak your mind and make it known, suggest solutions you can think of. Maybe even download Duel TNT and edit changes in yourself to test and prove or disprove their effectiveness. With Tristan's limited time and the necessity for a radical and thus risky solution to solve such a major problem, we need to pick up the slack ourselves if we want to improve things. To throw my hat into the ring, the best solution I can think of is to completely pause reload timers while a player is airborne, and balance the game around that. This is not the focus of the video, so I will not elaborate on my reasons, but I'm happy to discuss the idea. Or, if you think Duel TNT should be centered around its air game, speak your mind. I am eager to discuss this topic and hear any points to the contrary that might be presented, because at the end of the day, I just want a better game for all of us, same as anyone else. I will still be playing casually, running tournaments, playtesting, and the like, and I will return to competition if air camping is addressed, but for the time being, I'm tired of constantly losing sets and tournaments because of it. Thank you for listening.